Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, data evangelist with DATAVERSITY. Thank you for joining the latest in the monthly webinar series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna will be sharing her expert opinion on master data management, aligning data, process, and governance. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A panel. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the chat defaults to send to just panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the chat or the Q&A panels, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slides and a recording of this session and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you the speaker of this monthly series, Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years experience in helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She is currently the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. She has worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies worldwide in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and speaks regularly at industry conferences. She has co-authored several books on data management and is a regular contributor to industry publications. And with that, let me hand the floor over to Donna to begin the presentation. Hello, my friend.
Hello, thank you so much. Good as always to be a part of this and good to see some familiar names in the attendees, which is always great. Some of which I think we both met a couple weeks ago at EDW It was a nice in-person event. So as moving forward, however, if folks are brand new to this and you aren't yet a familiar name or face, this is a series, as Mark mentioned, and Dataversity keeps all of the previous recordings on their website. We also link to those on our website at Global Data Strategy, so you can catch any of those that you may have missed if you find them interesting. And I hope you can join us for upcoming sessions this year that you will see listed. But as Mark mentioned, the topic today is master data management, which I think, Mark and I were just kind of chatting before the event of just how MDM or master data management can sort of ebb and flow, but it's been around for years and it's definitely in kind of it's just a peak right now that everyone's very interested as we look into things like AI and machine learning and analytics and all the great things you can do with data. You need good data. So the value of getting your master data management is right, is valuable. Um, and I'm gonna talk today about some really practical ways to get value from master data management. Master data management is one of those things, and if you're not familiar with it, hopefully by the end of this webinar, probably after a few slides, you'll get it. It's the stuff you're used to using every single day in your organization, your customers, your products, your vendors, your patients, your students, your donors, all of the core information that you track every day is your master data. And managing that, it's not daunting. It's a bunch of simple things done together, which makes things complicated. It's as much a coordination activity as a data architecture activity. We'll talk through that. But I thought to start, especially those who may be new to master data, the best way to talk about it is to describe scenarios that I am sure you will recognize in your daily life. And I may ruin you. I've ruined my family and friends that you have a bad customer experience and when you actually think it through, I do this for a living, so I always think of that, that's probably a master data issue, right? And you think through, I had a friend, he actually came back from the bank. I told them that it was probably a master data issue when they couldn't get my account fixed. I'm like, I'm sure that went over well. He's like, no, it wasn't. But you will start thinking that yourself and also in your own organization, which is a healthy thing. It's the five whys. Why did this happen? And how do we really get down to the root of it? So let's do some storytelling to start. I'll start with what good looks like. And don't we all wish this type of experience was our typical experience, right? You're a hotel frequent guest. You walk in to your hotel and they say, "Welcome, Ms. Lim. Would you like an upper level room again? And it's your birthday, right? We have a special welcome gift. We made sure the fruit basket doesn't have nuts because we make sure you're allergic. Oh, thank you. That's always why I stay here while I'm in town, right?" And you could say maybe I don't want them to know all that about me, but these are probably things Ms. Lim shared with the hotel, or they have access to in a legal, non-creepy, you know, privacy issues aside. I think this is a very positive thing, and this is where a lot of organizations are really trying to get to that know your customer, understand your customer, and really offer a unique experience. The closest thing I get to that is the airline that seems to know me because I fly a lot because I'm a consultant, right? But wouldn't this be nice? But to get that, you have to have a single view of Ms. Lim and make sure her data is accurate and current, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't it be embarrassing if it were the other thing? It wasn't her birthday or she's not allergic to nuts and the poor gentleman at the front desk would look ridiculous, right? Which leads me to the second example that I'm sorry is probably more common, at least it is in my life. Something as simple, don't get me started. I have several of these going on just right now with a bank, with a credit card company, et cetera, et cetera. You try to change your address and it just doesn't stick, right? So, this poor man's trying to, I don't know, order something online. Sorry, that isn't a valid address. Are you serious? I literally just updated this online this morning. How can this happen? I know this happens a lot to my poor 90-year-old mom, and I try to explain to her, of course, it's a system integration issue. She's like, I don't care. I need my bank, and statement updated. So, unfortunately, this seems so easy, and it should be so easy from the customer perspective. If I updated my address, how come it isn't updated? And how come you don't know who I am? When in this case, I'm actually trying to tell you who I am and getting the right information. Data management folks in the fall call or enterprise architects in the call probably can think of several reasons why this might have happened. We will get to the punchline later in this presentation of why, in this case, it may have happened. So stay tuned. So these are your classic customer, and I'll touch on this a bit in the presentation. There's some core things in master data that all domains, right? When I say domains, it's things like area, right? The customer, product, client, et cetera. Those are your domains. There's some commonalities, but there's some differences in how you treat or the types of issues we typically see in customer versus product versus supplier and things like that. So I put two classic customer issues because partly we all are customers in our lives and we can relate to these. I also wanted to hit on some of the product master data, both good and bad, right? So let's start with good because we're positive folks. What good looks like? We probably do this, some of us every day, right? So we go online and we purchase something. I really like these. This gentleman likes these hot pink headphones up in the upper left, and they say, people who purchase these headphones also purchased a charging station. And by the way, we can ship that to you tomorrow. Isn't that great? This is a fictitious company, but I think we all know some very famous companies who do this very well. And why do they do that very well? Amazon is one, obviously, not our client, so I can say that. But they 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 not only have really good product master data and good taxonomies and hierarchies, and they get that, but also that's the customers who purchase this also purchase this. It's also having the right taxonomy of how I found those headphones. Do I look under music? Do I look under headgear? How do I find that? How do I invoice this to customers, right? If anyone's done a lot of product master data management, you're probably thinking of the different hierarchies that might be included in product. But also, there's relationships between these master data domains. We can ship it to you by tomorrow is partly a product issue. I mean, I've been in this industry almost 30 years now, and I've seen it all. And you're not alone if that makes you feel better. People who can't, companies that can't find the right SKU to ship this out. But in this case, what's good is they probably have a very good sense of their suppliers in their supplier network, in the ship to, in the build to address of their suppliers and customers, right? So it isn't enough in this particular case to have really good product master data. There's a lot of tangential master data domains like product, like location, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is sort of what in the product world, what a lot of organizations are striving for. But here I go, unfortunately, and some of you, again, who are working with product data might be facing this very type of issue and might be nodding your head. Master data getting it wrong. What do you mean we don't have accurate product weights and dimensions for this shipment? This is going to hold us up in customs, and our most important customer needs it this week. I know this isn't something I was aware of in my life until I did a lot of product master data management, but I will say without exaggeration, just this calendar year, we've had three customers face this very issue. Something is, and we've heard it all. And these ones in mention are all brands you probably know. And they literally have people at the shipping dock measuring their product, right? And how can someone not know that? And I guess I didn't realize how important that was. I guess it's obvious when you're trying to ship it or you're trying to do hot topic right now, trying to do tariffs and things like that across regions. So super important for such a simple thing. It's just a data field, but it's not. It actually drives your business. And how hard is that to get it right? Well, those of you who are doing this know how hard it is to get this right. And we'll kind of talk about this closed loop on this one later in the presentation as well. So stay tuned to see what the answer is. So those are four exactly, with customer and product and a good and a bad that hopefully you can relate to, at least one of those. And it might get your wheels a turning either in your day job at your organization or in your daily life. And again, I apologize. I've probably ruined it for you now. Whenever you have a problem, it's a fun exercise though, right? What data went wrong to make this experience wrong? Why didn't get my shipment on time? Why can't they know that I have a PO box and a physical address? Don't get me started on that one. That's a basic data model. Customer can have more than one address with different types, right? Stuff we've been solving in the industry, gosh, for years. But still, companies get it wrong all the time. And that's master data. All of these simple things put together to make it right. And I think that's the complexity. Nothing inherently in master data is complicated at all. It's just a bunch of different things of people working together. So we'll talk through that. So I gave you some hopefully sort of fun and interesting examples of master data. I want to go back to a more formal definition. Plus, I'm a data architecture, data management person, and I like myself a good definition. So I'm sort of a fan of the Gartner. They have this online. They've got some really good IT definitions. And I think these two I like because they've thought it through. So if we look at the top, what is master data? It's a consistent and uniform set of identifiers and the attributes that describe those core entities of your enterprise, customers, prospects, citizens, suppliers, etc. So you'll recognize those. Just I often say when you're describing your company or your organization, just describe it in a paragraph and then pick out the nouns, right? Like we're a global product company with 3,000 customers worldwide, with 400 customers in locations around the globe, right? What are the nouns in what I just said? Product, customer, employee, location, right? Those are probably your master data or reference data entities. So they're the things you already know. And what makes it hard is that those are touched across a lot of areas of the organization. So when we look at what master data management or MDM, I know because we in the industry hate to have standards, it's also called other things, mobile device management, et cetera. But in this case, it's master data management or MDM. And I think Gartner actually put some thought into this. That what they didn't say, and anyone doing a glossary on this call, please don't say data management is the management of master data management is the management of master data. That's not so helpful. But give some additional context, right? So it's a technology enabled discipline, correct. It is enabled by technology, but it is a discipline in which business and IT work together. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, if you weren't convinced already, you'll see that MDM is as much a business initiative as it is an IT one. And often there's a whole master data department that is driven by the business that has nothing to do with IT, right? Who's managing your suppliers? Often there's a master data team that does that, right? But to get it truly right, you need both IT and business to work together, which sometimes right there is the problem. And then they really think it through the uniformity, accuracy, and stewardship. And so this bunch there, it should be uniform, but they kind of you could tell whoever wrote this has lived it. Well, you don't want it uniformly wrong, right? Because we've probably seen that. Yeah, your address is incorrect in all our systems. That doesn't really help. So you want it consistent, you want it accurate, you want it stewarded, right? And why IT shouldn't lead a master data issue. And again, until you give these examples, I know this is recorded, but I'll admit I steal things from my clients. I steal good ideas. And one of my clients actually said to me, the most powerful words in in language are for example, right? And once you start giving examples to the business, I don't want to be a data steward. Well, great, then I'll own all of your suppliers' payment terms. Well, why would you do that? Well, because that's your master data, right? The payment terms on a supplier are probably your master data. And once they see that, okay, I'll own your customers, contact information and I'll keep that. Well, no, they're my customers. Exactly. That's why you're the data steward, right? And once you get that link between their day job and their accountability, most people often will be clamoring to be a data steward. So that's great. Semantic consistency, techie, geeky word for a very common thing. What do we even mean by a customer? Right? What is the product? And when I was young in my first DATAVERSITY conferences, people would say that. What is a customer? And kind of laugh. And I'd be like, how hard is that, you know. But when you look at it, anything that's used by the business has different viewpoints in the business. Is it a corporate customer? Is it a, individual human being customer? Is it a retail, wholesale, lapsed customer? You know, there's so many different flavors of that. Are we even talking about the same thing? And the accountability of the enterprise official shared master data assets, right? So shared is key. That's what makes master data critical, important, and difficult because you can't do master data in a vacuum. So that's why that intersection of governance becomes very important because people have to work together, and that's a big part of data governance. So I know I just spent a whole lot of time on one slide with definitions, but I do think this is key to kind of setting the stage for the whole topic of master data. So moving ahead, really the nut of this presentation is to get master data right. It's a three-legged stool, right? One leg of the stool is out, it's not going to work well, and that's what makes life complicated. If you're ever trying to fix a stool, and I have, it's really complicated. You get one right and the other one's crooked, and I bought a new stool. But you can't do that with master data. You are stuck with your organization. So you really have to get these three right. So data architecture, a lot of us on the call kind of naturally get that. It's a DATAVERSITY and a data architecture seminar. So I will go through that because I do think there's some unique things in architecture that relate to master data. But what I sometimes don't see enough of with MDM, and I want to stress, are the two at the bottom. Are you linking, are you looking at the business process that creates, updates, reads, and uses data, right? So, and deletes data. So that is often where the problems occur. You go back to that weights and measures. Some human being needs to put that in, right? They don't magically occur. The payment terms for a supplier don't magically appear, right? So how did this data get in there, and who's managing it, who's keeping it current, is really the crux of master data management. Has to be structured right, and have the right drop down lists and everything in the data architecture and everything, but process is a big part of that. And then kind of the cousin to that is data governance. Those people doing the process are the folks accountable. You don't always do data. There's different models of how you assign data stewardship and ownership by department, by business process, but often kind of looking at a business process is a good way to kind of identify data stewards. Who's actually touching this data? Who, quote, owns this process, right? Often if folks are doing, I've seen a trend of kind of ERP or CRM kind of global digital transformations, and often there's this concept of business process owners as part of that. You know, ERP systems tend to think in business process. Those are great candidates for your data stewards, right? So, not the only answer, there's other answers as well. But really, when you're looking at MDM or master data management, looking at these three together and in unison are super important. So let's go through them. Um, I can move my slide. Just before we get into the details of what these are, I'll call on my friends Gartner here again. It's a bit of a dated article, but it's as true as ever. And I agree with them, which is why I put it here in a slide, right? They say, well, while data architecture is complex, more complex is understanding the business process and the governance. And you've heard me if you've been on my webinars before, data is complicated, but people are more complicated, right? And people are part of process and governance. And they listed, the top two reasons if MDM fails is a failure to align with process and failing to align with governance. And I get it. It can seem messy. I'm a techie person, and gosh, all I have to do is do the match rules for customer, and I look like a hero. And why don't we just match on first name, last name, or email address? Or, you really need to involve the business in that and understand all the nuance around that before we start implementing technical solutions. Although tech is hard, I get it. I've been there. You really need to involve these other two aspects as well to really have success. And I have, it's rare. We solved one in master data management process without a tool at all. It was absolutely a process issue, and it was completely manual, and we had people doing things differently through process and governance. Pretty rare, but it does happen. In that case, it was kind of how they managed their suppliers. Was really a kind of a bespoke thing, and they just we tried to look at tools. I'm like, absolutely. In that case, it was a process and governance issue. But again, usually there's the three, but don't forget those two. Okay, so let's kind of go through each one of these. We'll start with data architecture because we're data architects, many of us on the call, and it's a data architecture series. So let's go there. So may surprise you that I'm starting with a conceptual data model. Full disclosure, I'm biased. I love them. They work all the time with the business. If you don't agree, I'll fight you in the hallway and discuss and show you all my success stories of how the business really loved these because it One thing they do well is even scoping what is your master data. A lot of the folks on my team, including myself, we almost can't think of a data strategy or an implementation without starting to map out the entities and the boxes and lines. And this is a good way to even get to that core of, and we often color code. I do a conceptual enterprise model, maybe master data is blue, reference data is kind of that weird beige, and it kind of helps prioritize what we're talking about. Also getting to the definitions, and then key is the relationship between domains. Again, don't get me started. My life has been ruined by simple business rules like, can a customer have more than one account? Those are simple data model rules that can make or break a business. I've seen both be true, depending on the organization. Sometimes an account is a one-to-one with a customer. Sometimes a customer can have more than one account. And if I'm trying to have more than one account and I'm a single customer and you're not letting me, you're losing business, right? So these things that seem so simple are typically core to what you're trying to do. And a lot of the data modeling tools I like, you can actually show the definition right on the data model, which I often do. But this kind of gets into the definition of customer and product. And gosh, this should be a discussion, and you'll learn a lot. A customer is a legal entity with an active account who has purchased a product in the past year. That might have not been what you guys initially thought when you saw that customer on the box. Is you might have thought of a person buying a set of headphones, right? No, but we're talking about organizations, and they have to have purchased in the past year. Wow, that's a kind of unique business rule. But that's pretty important if you're talking about, you were including lapsed customers that you're trying to do a campaign to get them to buy more this year. They wouldn't be considered a customer. So that's really, really important. Or um, a product is a retail physical product with a valid SKU. We don't include components or wholesale items. We don't include services. Wow, I might question that actually, right? And is that true in your organization? Do we sell services as products? Do they have a product number, right? I don't know the answer. These are fictitious, but you really need to think those things through with your master data. What are we even talking about, right? If you're selling to a person or a company is a pretty one, are we identifying by a VAT, I don't know, the DUNS number, or are we using first name, last name, et cetera, et cetera. So, important things to start before we even head in any direction. Typically when you get into master data, it's the critical data elements, and this is going to turn into a logical and then physical data model as well. I didn't go down to that level here. I think a lot of folks in the call know this, but often when you're looking at a critical data element, that's really what you might share with the business. In this case, we're talking about a human being customer. You can tell that just by the attributes or the critical data elements. What are the core, and that's a bit of an art and a science there. I would say they're critical to describing the domain, first name, family name, gender, date of birth, are probably important for a customer. They're shared across the systems. It's not the transactional data. You're not going to have with a customer total um, lifetime sales or something like that. That's typically on more of the warehousing or transactional layer. And these are healthy conversations to have with the business. I have probably had conversations on each one of these. Um, do we store race or gender? Is that too sensitive? Is that absolutely critical to how we market? Is date of birth needed? Is it too, can you have more than one email address for a customer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So really, this should be defined by the business, what we want to store. And often when I'm working with a business, I also say, if we're going to store it, you need to curate it and steward it, right? So it's tempting to say, right, we're going to have 40,000 um, attributes in our master data management because wouldn't it be cool to know everything around customer? We're doing this now with one client, and ideally, the analytics team would, oh, I'd love to know their occupation and their, where they were born and all this great stuff. So privacy aside, can we get that information? Is it accurate? Is it, really sparse? Who's updating it? Who maintains it? All of that is to be considered when you're thinking of master data because you want it core and accurate. And you can build it out over time, but I would say start simple to really understand, who this, are we even getting the right Joe Smith, right? So, another key part of master data and reference data are hierarchies, which are really just relationships, but they're kind of a special kind of relationship that tend to be core when we're looking at master data. And reference data. A common reference data might be kind of your divisions, departments, business units, um, and and often master data can have several or maybe roll-ups, right? Think of that example of the online sales. Someone's buying those headphones. There's probably a hierarchy for marketing for how you show that product in the website. There's probably a different hierarchy for finance for how you might roll that up into a cost center. There might be a different hierarchy for product development in terms of how they look at industry trends and things like that. And they're not all wrong. They're valid. They're just different, right? So don't try to force it into a single hierarchy. Um, those are valid reference data ways of looking at it. And then the master data itself, again, a product, and they're not our customers. I'm just using it as an example. Coca-Cola, is Coke the product? We kind of say that. Well, no, the product is probably a 6 ounce can of Coke Light, that was purchased in a six pack, right? And so what's the brand? That's Coca-Cola. The product line might be Coke Light. The product might be the fact that it's in a can, right? And each company is very different and what that means. And we use things kind of, that's what master data is hard. We just, oh yeah, I'm buying a soda. Well, there's a whole lot around that and getting that hierarchy. And where's the SKU? Is there a SKU at the product or is there a product item level? Is that, et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you, but if you might be nodding your head if you're doing this right now with your product. So, getting these hard, and it isn't only product. It tends to be pretty important with product, but even think of a customer. Do you have a parent, say it's a corporate customer. Do you have a parent company? Do you really need that, interaction between the parent and the subsidiaries? Is there an ultimate parent, right? All this stuff needs to be mapped out before, in conjunction with your critical data elements. And they tend to work out well, like especially with product, right? When I have to do this, we start to apply attributes to this, you can kind of see, well, where would the SKU live? And the brand name is probably at the brand level, right? And then, the product name. And I often put like sample data on these to really help kind of flesh those out. So hierarchies are as important as the entities and the attributes themselves. So I'm not going to go super deep into logical and physical modeling. It's a huge part of this. But just to kind of get that idea that defining that architecture is a key part. I can talk about process and I will, and I'll talk about governance. But if you don't have this right, you're governing and managing the process around the wrong stuff, right? So, and if you don't have the right master data hierarchy, and again, some of the customers we're working with now to fix this sort of thing is absolutely not the fault of the business process or the governance. The way the system's set up doesn't allow the people to put the data in the right way. And I see a lot of, I don't blame anyone when the master data is wrong. It's just sort of I don't know if it's victim of success over time. Things build and they morph, and people are trying to do the best thing with what they have. And I've seen, gosh, we had one client that put the entire all of the attributes in the description because the system was so outdated. They just put name and weight and color and SKU and all the stuff, and it was organized and logical. And we looked at it at first, as a data management professional, you're like, what a horrible way to do that. But they were working within the constraints they had, right? So our job was to make sure the system allowed them to put the data in the right way. So something to think about. Okay. And this may be obvious to you. I know it was not obvious to me when I first started out my career. And a lot of these webinars are kind of, gosh, I wish someone had explained this to me when I was new. So hopefully this helps you. There's difference between transaction data and master data, but they're absolutely related, right? So your master, if this is a fictitious on sporting goods store, full disclosure, if you've heard me before, I'm a skier. And so I used a ski example, right? That I have some customers. I have Stefan Kraus, I have Donna Burbank, I have Joe Smith and Wendy, who they're all kind of buying these different products. And I bought the product and I paid a certain price for it in a certain location. And if I want to know what was my total sales for this Scarpa Telemark ski boot, then I need to sum that up. That's your typical data warehousing. So these transactions, the fact that Donna Burbank bought a ski boot in in 2017, that's your transaction data. But to really get that reporting, typically if this were your warehouse, you need good master data. Or if you're a warehousing person, those are your conformed dimensions. I want to know sales by customer, sales by product. That's typically your master data, right? Because this seems easy, and there's metadata snuck in here, sneaked in here too, right? I have Stefan Kraus that on this date, and again, I don't know, is that February 1st because it's Europe, or is that January 2nd? And is this January 5th or probably, it's probably not May 1st, right? So even just how you format the date, which is metadata, right? And here's the location. Is that where the person lives? Is that where they bought it? Is that where the credit card number is, right? So much metadata around master data, but they're different things. I digress. But here we'll have, there's a Stefan Kraus in St. Moritz, Switzerland, lucky guy, and another one here in Zurich. Is that the same guy who bought different stuff? Different cities, or are those two different Stefan Krauses, right? So that's pretty important when I'm trying to do a campaign around customers. Is this the same customer, or is this two or potentially three different customers? We don't know. That's master data. Or product, right? You'll see that there's a different code for Stefan and Donna. Is that because we have different SKUs and codes and product numbers in Europe versus the US, or is that a mistake? They look kind of similar, but they're, I don't know. Are those the right prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of your core areas like your customer, your product, and location. We could say that's either reference data or master data. It really depends on the situation. But I would say your codes, the reference data for, again, here, there's a metadata slash reference data. CH is the two-character country code for Switzerland, but it's the two-character state code for Colorado. One's a state, one's a country. Absolutely different things. The only commonality is they're two characters, right? But pretty different. And then location, again, that's probably a master data if it's your stores, probably reference data if it's the address of a customer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So something to think through, but that's the kind of the difference and the importance of getting it right. And don't feel alone. And I'm no longer surprised. By the time I retire, and nothing will surprise me anymore. Major brands that you will know and love and purchase, and management asks for something as simple as, could you tell me how many products we sold by region last year? And the team comes back and says, no. And the CEO rightly says, WTF, are you serious? And like, well, your SKUs don't match and your locations don't match, and we don't know the difference of a customer. And wow, and I don't necessarily blame them. A lot of these big brands that we work with, and probably started bootstrap. And if I were bootstrapping this telemark ski boot, I didn't even know if it was going to work. The last thing I'd be thinking of is my reference data and master data. I'm just trying to sell ski boots. And oh my gosh, it took off. But now I have a different SKU for each ski boot, and I can't do, so it's not, again, typically these things have a reason, and no one's stupid. We tend to think that, gosh, someone was dumb, but that's A, not a really friendly way to make friends that are going to work with you. And B, you're typically wrong. Again, as I get older, generally when I'm like, that's stupid, it's because I'm missing something. Um, so that's often why. It was a business decision, and I probably would have made the same one. You're scaling, just sell stuff. Well, where if it when this works, we'll figure it out later. And that's often when companies come to us as, ooh, we're scaling and now we're stuck. We were, we didn't think it was going to be this big. Now how do we fix it, type of thing. So, just to nerd out a little bit, one person's master data is another reference data. There's no hard and fast rule. There's some commonalities. Generally, when there's codes, kind of leads to reference data. But for example, regions, markets, locations are sometimes reference data. We worked with, they spoke with us at DATAVERSITY, so I can use the name, the Environment Agency of England, and they make the maps of England. So these regions, or which would probably be reference data for someone else, was core master data because that they define the region, so which is kind of cool. But again, we worked also with a flavor house, and flavor for a product for most people is an attribute of product, right? It's chocolate ice cream. It's an attribute of product. But they had I mean, they did trending. So someone who's making ice cream said, is white chocolate flavor trending in France? Do we send more white chocolate to France than we do in Germany? So for them, flavor was master data. They really had entirely the difference between white chocolate and dark chocolate, and it's fascinating, and always made me hungry working with them. But so there's no hard and fast definition. It really depends on your business, right? So, but it's sort of the little cousin of master data. And often if you do purchase a master data tool, it should also hold your reference data as well. Okay, you may be thinking, and I'm not looking at the chat, so you may be saying it out loud. I get this all the time, and so I'm going to address it. I hear this all the time. because we or I, when we do projects, very clearly in the data model say customer, employee, supplier, contact, a patient, a provider, a citizen. And generally, some sort of data architect type person goes, "You are so overcomplicating it. It's just a person." And you have a single person table with a name and an address. People have names. What does it really matter if you're a customer or employee, or you're so overthinking of it? Just kind of, have the person table, and there you go. You're done. You guys don't waste my time, right? Or legal entity or the party model, right? You have a customer, a supplier, a partner, a subsidiary. Um, it's just a company. Get the DUNS number, the VAT number, the EIN or whatever it is, and you're done. This isn't complicated. Whether it's a customer or supplier, doesn't matter. You're overthinking it. Well, to that I say, well, yeah, we could just have a big table with just the thing table, and everything has attributes, and it's just one big box. But not only that, but there's nuance. Like I think we understand that a customer is treated very differently than an employee in the attribute, and if nothing else, the business process around it. So okay, maybe there is one table that has your legal entities and you type it or something, right? But you're missing the point if you're doing master data management. How you onboard your suppliers is absolutely, I guarantee you, different than how you onboard your customers. And the activities and the processes and the data stewardship and the management around customers and suppliers is absolutely different. The fact that they both have a name and a company number is probably the easiest part of MDM. So that's why I push that back because, yeah, the easy part of MDM is putting it in a table with some attributes. The hard part is all the governance and the understanding of the use. And just, oops, sorry, just to hit it home, I'll tell my stories. What could possibly go wrong with this situation? This is where we just have a people table, right? And we're working, at a pharmacy. Um, and the guy's trying to get his prescription filled, and the lady says, "Sure, I'll just need your salary, your social security number, and your hire date before filling the prescription." He's like, "Sure, as soon as I can see your list of medications." Right? I mean, it wouldn't be weird at all for this person as an employee for someone to know her salary and social security number and hire date. And she's a person, but be absolutely weird for her to share that outside of when she's just trying to fill a prescription. And similarly, the customer asking the employee what the list of medications they're on is absolutely HIPAA non-compliant and all of that. But it's not weird for the person filling the prescription to know the medications they're on, right? So again, context is everything. And I think when you put it in these examples, well, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, maybe you could save some database space by putting them all in one table and hiding different fields and different use cases. But again, that's not the right point, right? That really, how are we treating these elements? Who's stewarding the elements? Do we need to track social security number in these use cases? If you don't have to, is it ethical and all of these different things, right? That's the harder part, and then throwing it in a table. Rant over. But think about that. Doesn't mean you might share it in a table, but you're only part of the way there. You really need to understand the process and governance and use cases around it. Okay, moving on to I can move my slide. I can do it. It's a business process that I've talked a lot about. It could be a whole webinar of itself, but just showing some examples will hopefully kind of hit home. Um, to really get it right, I mean, why master data is master data is because it's used by so many different processes across the organization, right? I've seen, and many times as an architect, I'm an architect, so I'll just knock us. I figure we're amongst friends, so if I kind of needle you a little bit, this is familiar ribbing, right? So, but I'll have an architect generally in my session going, well, just do your data governance by domain, right? You've got an owner for customer and you've got an owner for vendor. It just makes it easier. Well, it's probably easier in terms of like defining a project around customer master data or even defining a data model. But in terms of stewardship, what one person owns customer, or going back to that healthcare example, who owns patient data? When I go into the hospital, they check my insurance number and my name and my address, and then I go to the doctor and they give me a my diagnosis. Well, the person understanding my insurance information is the steward of those attributes, and the doctor is the steward of my diagnosis. I wouldn't want the person at the front desk giving me my diagnosis or being responsible for that. And similarly, the doctors really shouldn't be handling all my contact information and insurance, right? It makes sense when you put it into those scenarios, right? So customer everyone's interested in it, but here it's from business, and this is almost your ERP type example, right? It's business planning, order to cash, logistics, source to pay, all these other, well, actually not source to pay, but forecast to plan, all these different areas are using customer, and they have a voice and a responsibility. So who owns certain attributes, but that doesn't mean they own it in terms of I have it and nobody else. It's on the contrary. It's probably that other people are using it. So you are the steward of it and you have to make sure you share it, you define it accordingly. Other people that's why a governance committee or groups of people having a voice is, and I know you're putting those weights and measures in, but you're doing it in imperial and I need it in metric. So could you please not do that anymore? So that type of conversation can really help. So you need to look at this sort of area. Often when we sort of find problems and quick wins, and it's often um, in the process model. So we work, and I'll kind of show them at the very end as kind of a little case study. A company and I often it's not funny because these are real world examples and I'm not belittling them, but when you do a project and we often start with interviews and we do a lot of conversations with folks, and there's general, and I always say when you're trying to sell this stuff or explain it to people, anecdotes are the best case. And there's usually something that comes up and you can just feel it in the room that that was a bad thing. And we worked with a restaurant chain. It was almost like a Monty Python skit to me because whenever someone brought up cheese, it's like, not the cheese incident. Do not talk about cheese. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. Like, I never really thought she might not like cheese. I might be vegan, but it's usually not frightening like that and doesn't have such this, like, it was a visceral reaction to people. And so the story here was that they had a very dynamic menu and they had something that you could pick. I want a sandwich, but instead of American cheese, I want blue cheese or something like that. And they were allowed people to switch out, but I think it was blue cheese or something like that, and they switched it out. But the price was actually less than the cost of the product, right? So in this case, this thing that's highlighted here, supply chain and accounting had come up with a theoretical price, but by the time they put it in the market, it didn't match. So basically, it was a super popular menu item, and they were losing money with every sale. And I think they had lost about $1 million US that year for the cheese. Right? So that's why people got upset about cheese. And I knew, but it still makes me laugh. They are not our customer, and it's in the news, so I can share it. But you might have heard what was it? Red Lobster, I think they had the all-you-could-eat shrimp basket or something, and they didn't price that accordingly, and actually caused them some financial trouble, right? But how does someone not get that right? And we worked with them, and we drew out a process model very similar to this. Who's touching data as they go? And are you looking at the same price field? Are you overriding the price field? Are you talking to each other? How does this type happen? And not to beat up that particular company. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen it all. We had one company launch a major, and I know you folks know this brand, so I'm not going to say it. A major problem with the product with a code name in it, like it didn't have the name, and it wasn't Coke, but it's something like instead of Coke on the bottle, it had code one. I mean, that embarrassing, or et cetera, et cetera. And generally that stuff, it's not a data. There was a field in the database that said product name. It was the process and the governance around that nobody updated it correctly. And or ship date. We had one customer and they sent it to market to one of their big, retail stores early. And this one, it was one of those products that people wait to come out, people line up in the store, and someone ruined it by shipping it the wrong day. Like all of this type of stuff. Those are not data management problems. Typically, generally process and governance. Are we stepping on each other, or do we understand who owns what? And again, sometimes it's true ownership. I own the price because I'm pricing it, but often it's more that coordination of I'm stewarding it. I need to make sure it's meeting everybody's needs. Okay, and so a good old-fashioned tool that I use all the time, and we have solved major multinational company problems with this type of thing, is just from these process models, create a CRUD matrix. Great, terrible name for a great thing where CRUD isn't the nicest word, maybe druck, but where things are created, read, updated, and deleted. So who is creating this data over time, and who's updating it? So generally you see problems, either nobody's creating it and it doesn't get entered, nobody's entering the product weight, or two people are entering it, or someone's entering it and updating it, or someone enters it but the other person doesn't have access to it. So these different combinations are generally what causes problems. So that person at the shipping dock earlier in the presentation of how come I don't have accurate weights and measures? It was in there. Product development put it in. Marketing can see it. For somehow the logistics and the warehouse team can't see it. So that would have been a simple fix of can you send it to them, or does their system have access, or is it a security thing, or what? This is a fictitious example, but it could be any flavor of that. That maybe it wasn't put in, or it was put in, someone updated it wrong, or something, right? So highlighting these can often highlight some of these issues. So business process models and CRUD matrices fit very well together. Often I do in these process models um, kind of putting the the data that's used in each process. This is sort of a BPMN if people are familiar with that methodology, where they have kind of the data, and I just customize it a little bit by actually putting the list of attributes. It can get long, but some of the key ones, that's why a CRUD matrix you don't have to limit. This on the process model, you can just kind of put the ones that are most important, but this can be everything. So you can really drill down and find those issues. And that's where you look like the hero of, hey, I solved the cheese incident or whatever it is, right? Um, Okay. This also leads into governance, and I do want to motor on a little to have some Q&A if folks want it. So governance to me, and it isn't the only way to do governance, but especially with MDM, it's a very common way that when we talked about those swim lanes, right, that in this case you have accounting and shipping and fulfillment and sales, flip that process model, and those swim lane owners are often your data owners or data stewards, right? Because they're the ones actually using or creating or needing the data. And again, sometimes data stewardship is I actually own it and I enter it and I'm responsible for the quality. But sometimes it's having a voice in the conversation of, hey, I need it and I need this in a certain way from somebody else so people can solve. And I've had some really success. I like to workshop these sorts of things, like put out the process model on a whiteboard and having prepared it ahead of time, of course, and put some of these data and you'll hear data attributes on the model and say, okay, and then who does this and who does this? And I've had people argue and then solve it themselves. You're not sending me this, and some once, and it doesn't always happen this evening. The person said, "Oh, do you need that? Okay, just send it," right? Like often people they're not trying to come to work to do the wrong thing. They're just trying to get their job done, and they probably don't have the time or the account the voice to actually have these conversations. Right there, they're just busy doing their day job, and that's why governance is kind of that time sometimes to step back. And master data management to step back and actually map this out. I had one client, and then they basically we mapped out their process. And she said, wow, when you look at our processes, we look ridiculous, don't we? Because no one had mapped it out. It was sort of they took the data and put it in a spreadsheet and then printed that spreadsheet and mailed it to someone who then typed it in a system. I mean, it was crazy. It really was crazy. And again, no individual person was foolish. It was just these processes that build over time, and no one, again, they're so busy, didn't have time to step back. So that's why these master data efforts can really be a business process change effort and efficiency. So, again, folks on this call probably know these, but these are just some sample if you're new to data governance types of roles, where if you're a business data owner, they're generally your more senior person. They might even be back to that conceptual data model in the beginning. What domain do we start with? Is it customer? Is it product? Is it client? Is it patient? Is it provider? Where do we set? And then what are some of these? If it's customer, do we store the credit score for customers? Is that ethical? Do we do that, right? And then the steward is generally, sometimes they work for that data owner. And generally they're a bit more in the weeds. They're going to understand the business rules around that or the actual data or the actual customers and they're probably more in the weeds of the day-to-day rules. And then I separate out a technical data steward. Your data stewards and data owners should be from the business. But sometimes there is generally someone who knows the systems. I'm the ERP admin or I'm the CRM admin. And sometimes they know the system so well they almost feel like the business, but they're separate. They should work with a business data steward for these business rules. Like a customer can have more than one address. You have to customize the system to do it that way. And it's usually simple things like that that get folks in trouble. And there's more rules than this to governance, but just thought I'd highlight to kind of explain some of that. So putting it all together, just quickly, is really the implementation styles of, you can, whatchamacallit? a misconception of MDM often when I talk about it to clients. They'll say, well, I can't, replace all my systems with one place where everyone types everything in. And generally, that's not it. And you can see these a registry would be you keep it in the system altogether, and the MDM just kind of has keys to link to where it is in the system. Centralized, I'm going to jump into the third one there. That is where you author the master data right in the system. Sometimes I do that for reference data. Is there a place where you can keep the hierarchies and things? Coexistence, full disclosure, is my favorite one. To me, that's the best of both worlds, where the data is still used in the systems and the MDM is more of an orchestration mechanism to kind of harmonize things. And consolidation, is kind of similar where you're keeping everything in one place. And then the other part I should have mentioned, there's operational focus where you're actually what we call publishing, so subscribing, you're actually updating the data in the systems. And then there's an analytical focus, and it's typically both. But I generally say start with your analytic. Worst case, you've messed up a report. You're not, when you trust that, then go into actually publish and subscribe into the systems, which is more valuable, but often more risky. So this, a fictitious example where you have, I'm describing the coexistence model here, where you have the MDM tool, which has a database that has a master data golden record with master and reference data. All of your systems are there, your CRM and your sales and your marketing, et cetera, are all feeding into that. You're doing the data quality. You're going to have kind of the human in the loop with data stewardship. And then that can also feed your data warehouse for reporting. So what makes this is your customer example, right? Each system has their attributes that they store to run the system. They're not really thinking about master data. They're thinking of getting the data right so I can do billing or marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And so the critical data elements or whatever in the MDM are kind of either two ways to look at it. They're either a subset because you're not doing everything, but they're sort of a superset in that you're taking just the right number of attributes from each one, right? That, maybe no system has all of these, but you can combine it into this golden record that has every great thing from all the systems and the most accurate stuff. Um, so often there's matching rules and merge rules and all of that to help create that golden record. That could be a whole webinar. I'm not getting into that today because I want to kind of show the breadth. But here you can see in the bold, we took the first name, family name, address, zip from the second system. The postal code, is matched between those other systems. And, how do I take these golden record fields and find, is it the most recent record? Is it the quote best record, best on business rules? Do I always take it from the billing system because we think that's more right? Could be all or parts of the above. And then often you do have a human in the loop. I don't know, we're getting patient data to amputate someone's leg. I think probably having a person look at that match and make sure that Donna Burbank that you're amputating is the right Donna Burbank and that's the correct, maybe that was a grim example, right? But or as you're training the rules to kind of look at those thresholds and things, often having a person look at those rules can be really helpful. That's a good combination of automation and data stewardship. Okay, so just quickly, this is the cheese incident example of kind of wrapping it all up with an example. In this, again, it was a restaurant chain that knew they had problems with their menus, which is their product. They didn't know why. They knew they had a problem. So we went through, did all of the things I just talked about. We did a data model, we did a process model, we talked to all the stakeholders, and really for them, it was as much of a process issue as anything else, right? The people weren't talking to each other. So they did use a master data management tool, but it was less about the matching and more about the coordination and the workflow for them. That can we get the stuff from the kitchen and then to go to the menu and then go to supply chain and then have it in the point of sale system and have it all coordination as well as the business rules around that. So kind of a success story there that it wasn't what we thought. It was a data management issue, but more so a people and process issue as well. So in summary, MDM is hot. It's been hot for decades, but particularly hot now as folks are really looking to become more data driven. And to get it right is that kind of three-legged stool. But it's worth it. I hope I didn't make it sound too complicated. It's just a bunch of simple things done together. But do give it a try because it really has a very exponential effect on your business when you do get it right. If you can join us next month, we'll be talking about data models near and dear to my heart. Full disclosure, as sponsors of this webinar and Dataversity, we do this for a living. So if you're looking to do any of the things we talked about on a call, don't hesitate to reach out. Either go to our website or my email is actually on the second slide. We'd be happy to help. And with that, I will open it up for Q&A. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, actually, chat has been very chatty. There's been a number of side debates kind of going on, but we do have one question. I love your examples, Donna, because I was at an organization not too long ago where they didn't know the cost of selling something and sold it at a price, and they came to me and said, "We're not sure how much money we make or lose every time we make a sale."
Yeah.
And my alarm bells went off. How does that even happen? And then I started digging into it, and it was even the GL, which is like another thing that we can master as master data management folks. It just didn't capture the things that went into the cost of a product. So, I mean,
Mhm.
fascinating worlds in MDM. But our one question is from one of our viewers. Love the BPM CRUD data elements linkage. And their question is identifying critical data elements the first step to the linkage process, or do we do it for all data elements in a system?
That's a really great question. For a lot of this, it's iterative. But I tend to do the process model and then in separately do the critical data elements and then overlay those critical data elements on the process model. And so I would say do the CDEs first, but in doing that, you're probably going to find more, or you may think some of the one, it's a great way to vet them, right? Or if you're absolutely at a loss and don't know where to start with CDE, sometimes mapping out the process can help. Think about it. Okay, when I onboard a customer, what fields do we look at? I'm working with a customer right now. That's how they went through their the first draft of a critical data element. But then it caused, well, why do we ask for that? Or shouldn't we ask for others? So if you had to pick, I'd say do the CDEs first because it
Mhm.
gives you a starting point. But absolutely, it doesn't stop there. Either it's iterative, or as I said, if you're stuck, sometimes starting with process is a great way to kind of get your brain juices flowing. But great
Well,
question.
I love that example, Donna, that you give because starting with a process, worst case scenario, you're aligning to a business goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have another question coming in. I think the problem is not lacking the three legs stool, but most companies are trying to hire one person doing everything. This naive
Mhm.
mindset is a major pitfall. How do you address that?
No, absolutely. It takes a village. I think last month I did a webinar on roles. So show that to your management and it kind of there's some good definition of who does what. But worst case, you are the often when they hire someone, it's the data architect or the MDM tool vendor. But that's where data governance is your friend. That's your team, right? You can draft some of these, but a lot of the heavy lifting on the either the process and the data elements and things like that is on the business or your data governance team, or are there other teams in your org? If there's an enterprise architecture group, they're often your friend. They might even have these models. So yeah, it shouldn't just be one person. But in small companies, I have seen at least one person spearheading the MDM, but by definition you have a lot of touch points, so leverage them, and maybe some of this already exists and you're getting advocates in doing that. Wow, awesome process model, want to join this and help together, and that might be a hidden benefit that you have to reach out and get this coordination that you need to anyway. But yeah, you can tell your boss that probably more than one person would be helpful if that helps your case.
Awesome. We have no further questions, and we have barely minutes left. But thank you very much, Donna, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you, chat, for being so electric as always. And have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Donna.
Thank you.